In the Nile, there is two different concepts related to climate that we should take into account. One is climate change, when we think about major changes in climate that are already happening, but in the future as well, but climate variability. Climate variability is the norm in the Nile. And all attempts of cooperation so far, I mean, in the last 20 years, for example, is exactly to address this climate variability. And we can say that by tackling the climate variability, we are tackling climate change as well. So the question then is that how do the agreements and the negotiations in the Nile actually address and incorporate issues at transboundary level to manage climate change? And this is particularly important in the case of droughts and severe and prolonged droughts, because we will have less water in the system. I mentioned the likelihood of conflicts related to climate change. Perhaps we need to take into account what is already the current situation. Climate-related conflicts already exist at the national level and the local levels. As I mentioned just before, droughts and floods are recurrent events. And we can talk about a lot of existing conflicts already, but at national level. And if we look at very serious cases, like in Darfur, the war was not about climate change, but the climate factor was there, and it was very important, namely in the impacts of the livelihoods of people when you have different types of livelihoods, like, for example, agriculture and pastoralism. Now, when we talk about conflicts between countries, so interstate conflicts, this is very difficult to say that there are conflicts or there will be conflicts. If we think about the impacts as impacts on the water quantity and availability, then we can imagine that there will be serious conversations about water uses and allocations, because there will be less or more water in the system. And in a way, we can say the conflict that exists right now, which is a political and diplomatic conflict and not an armed or military conflict, is already about climate change, because it has to do with concerns of Egypt in particular, of what happens if there is a prolonged drought or a severe drought for many years. And then the question is that, can this be addressed now? Because we have to be responsible and think about solutions for the future, is that yes, it can be managed and it can be mitigated. If it can be avoided, that's another thing. I'm talking about impacts, and the role of infrastructure has a very big role. Be large-scale dams, be other kinds of infrastructures. We have to think about ways of addressing it that are done through institutions and legal agreements. That depends on what are the future scenarios. We can, I mean, to simplify, think about three kinds of future scenarios. So in the worst case, we will have climate change impacts which are severe, let's say, that will hit the whole region. So we are not looking now at national level. And that in the absence of agreements, we are talking about a new generation of agreements that should definitely include climate change concerns in the agreement. If not, we are really still talking about past agreements which do not address that. And so if there is an absence of an institutional and legal framework or arrangements, we can imagine that the conflict will intensify. And by this, I don't mean a military conflict, as this is very unlikely and an undesired scenario and wouldn't serve any of the parts, including Egypt. Then we can think about the best case scenario, which is no extreme climate events, even if in short term. For example, we didn't observe many in the last 10 years, or floods has been an issue, but in a way controllable, and countries continue the kind of cooperation that we have now, like very low profile. There is no arrangements between the countries a priori that they should come and not ad hoc. And this can be done with what usually is called no regrets approaches. So whatever decisions, be in infrastructure or institutional building, that have to be adopted now, they should be good for addressing the issues now and in the future. Well, as the worst case scenario and the best case scenario usually are the less likely, let's think about the most likely, which is a pragmatic scenario. So the basin will experience moderate or even serious climate events, but the countries will continue engaging to address the implications this has, not just for the countries, but we should refocus on the societies, environment, and water availability for different users, which puts a big responsibility in the governments in particular to negotiate and agree on trade-offs that could deal at the same time with the climate issues and the economic and political in order to avoid a conflict. And this should be done with or without an agreement.